Tonight at 10, Hurricane Matthew batters the Caribbean, leaving more than 800 dead in Haiti alone. It's the worst storm to hit the region in a decade, with tens of thousands left homeless. Rescuers are only now reaching the worst hit areas. We've spent the day with one team trying to help survivors.
We have nothing left. Our personal things, important documents like birth certificates, it's all gone. We sleep on the street with our children and nobody came to help us until now.
The hurricane is now moving up the coast of Florida, leaving 500,000 homes without power. We'll have the very latest. Also tonight. Get ready for turbulence. The Chancellor's warning on the UK economy as the pound plunges to a 30-year low against the dollar amid Brexit worries. As UKIP MEP Stephen Wolfe remains in hospital tonight, the colleague accused of hitting him denies an attack.
There was no punches thrown, there was no face slapping, there was no digs, there was nothing. It was, as you know, people in Hull would term as, you know, handbags at dawn.
Questions about the employment practices of one of Britain's most fashionable online retailers will have a special investigation.
Come on, big fella.
And meet Britain's most valuable sports star, why a retired Frankel is worth more than any Premier League footballer.
And here in the South, Gone, the former boss of troubled Southern Health, leaves the trust altogether. And after 2 years after 4 sailors drowned in the Atlantic, the director of a Southampton yachting company faces manslaughter charges.
Good evening. The number of people killed after Hurricane Matthew cut a devastating path across the Caribbean has been rising steadily throughout the day. In Haiti alone, more than 800 people are thought to have died. Matthew is the most powerful storm to hit the area in a decade and is now moving steadily up the east coast of the southern United States. In Haiti, rescue teams have only just begun reaching remote areas cut off by the storm. The BBC travelled with a medical team to the southern town of Port Salut, and our correspondent Nick Bryant has sent us this report.
Today we join the first medical teams to reach the coastal communities stranded after the hurricane. Doctors flown in by helicopter, rushing to treat the wounded in devastated areas cut off from the rest of the country. These have become morbid journeys, because as contact is finally made with more marooned towns, the number of dead continues to rise. Only now are we getting a true sense of the lethal force of Hurricane Matthew.
They were in the house when the storm hit, and parts of it, you know, fell in on them, but they were able to ride out the storm in the house.
This is what's left of Port Salut, for local Haitians a popular tourist destination, known for its tranquil beaches. Now it's become a place of misery, hardship, need. The doctors managed to reach Port Salut's hospital to treat a man whose legs were both broken by a collapsing wall.
The wall fell on his legs, broke both of his legs. I don't think he's got a pelvic fracture, but he might, and obviously hit his head, and he's been sewn up.
For all his agony, at least he's still alive. Many of the dead were killed by falling buildings and flying debris.
Okay, just go watch this.
This is Jeremy, one of the worst affected communities, now a place of ruin and bereavement. 80% of the town has been wrecked. Even buildings that have stood for generations have been partially destroyed.
We have nothing left. Our personal things, important documents like birth certificates, it's all gone. We sleep on the street with our children and nobody came to help us until now.
As the coastline was battered by storm surges, as the city was inundated by floodwaters, many people drowned. Medics think that was the biggest single cause of death. When we arrived in the country on Tuesday, the official death toll was 3 people. Now that figure is being measured in the hundreds. Sometime in the future, long after the cameras have gone, people here might wonder why their homeland seems stuck in a cycle of misfortune. Their more immediate concern, though, is survival.
Now, 29,000 homes have been destroyed by the hurricane, and some 350,000 people are in need of assistance, and not a lot of assistance is getting through. There are many aid organisations based in Haiti doing a great job. They came here in 2010 after that earthquake, and they haven't left. But the relief effort is being hampered by the inaccessibility of those worst hit communities. You can only reach them right now by air or by sea. And because of those communication problems, we're being told tonight that we might not get a final death toll until this time next week, Clive.
Nick, thank you for that. Nick Bryant there in Haiti. Well, Hurricane Matthew is now moving up the coast of Florida with winds of 120 miles an hour, whipping up waves in some places as high as a double-decker bus. There are warnings of the threat of flooding from a storm surge, while more than 500,000 homes have been left without power. Our correspondent Laura Bicker reports now from close to Daytona Beach in Florida.
Hurricane Matthew has stalked the Florida coastline. Authorities described it as a monster. Millions across the East Coast were told to evacuate, and they settled into makeshift shelters. After abandoning their homes to the hurricane, all they could do was wait and hope. As the storm strengthened, winds of over 100 miles an hour clashed with power lines, cutting supplies to 500,000 homes.
The house just came apart.
In Cape Canaveral, some of the buildings simply could not withstand the constant beating. The flying debris was captured on camera. But as conditions begin to ease, officials fear complacency will set in and people will leave their shelters too quickly.
The wind has pounded this part of Florida for the last 12 hours, and this is the result. Structurally, most of the homes remain intact. However, authorities fear the worst might not be over. They say that out there they've measured waves at 17 feet high. Now that's the size of a double-decker bus. If that comes ashore, these levels will rise and there could be coastal flooding.
And in the last few hours, those fears proved well-founded. A coastal surge hit Jacksonville in the north of Florida. The Sunshine State is used to storms, but Matthew is proving to be unpredictable. It now has its sights set on Georgia, South and North Carolina, where a state of emergency has now been declared. This hurricane has not finished with the US just yet. Laura Bicker, BBC News, New Smyrna Beach, Florida.
At the end of a week in which the pound fell to a 30-year low against the dollar, the Chancellor has reaffirmed there will be a period of turbulence ahead as markets get used to the idea of Britain leaving the European Union. But Philip Hammond insisted the fundamentals of the UK economy were strong and the government would take the necessary measures to support it. He's been speaking to our economics editor, Kamal Ahmed.
The pound under pressure, falling all week as markets fear Brexit, and then overnight in Asia a flash crash, a 9% fall in 2 minutes, down to $1.18 as investor nerves were compounded by computer programs automatically selling the falling currency.
Get America working.
In Washington today, the Chancellor described it as technical, but admitted it was time to get used to a pretty bumpy ride.
Markets will go up and down. Markets respond to noises off, and as I said earlier this week, we're going to go through a period of volatility now.
The pound has been under pressure since the vote to leave the European Union. Just before the referendum, it was trading at $1.50. Since then, it has fallen markedly, closing tonight at $1.24 after a slight recovery from those spectacular overnight lows. A weaker pound is good for exports and our tourist industry as foreign visitors look for bargains, but it is less good for those travelling abroad. Holidays are more expensive, and for inflation as imports like food and fuel become more expensive. Another casualty today, the government's plan to sell its £3.6 billion stake in Lloyds Bank in a 1980s-style public share offering. Mr. Hammond said market volatility had put paid to that policy.
Even here in Washington, for the Chancellor and all his officials, talk is dominated by one thing, and that, of course, is Brexit. I think he was in reassurance mode, reassurance for business, he told me that he wanted to see the closest possible trade ties with the rest of the European Union, and reassurance for the public, saying that we had to look through all this currency volatility at the fundamentals of the UK economy. Fundamentals, he said, were strong.
And reassurance on the government's enthusiasm for paying off its debts.
Some people have said that you're looking to spend a huge amount more on infrastructure and borrow more to do that. Can we expect a spending splurge ahead?
No spending splurge. What we have said we are going to do is create, within a new fiscal framework, enough space for the government to be able to respond to the turbulence in the economy that I've talked about this week. As we go through this period, we want to be able to provide fiscal support if necessary.
Brexit or not, we are still making things. The economy has performed more strongly than many expected following the referendum. Will that give Mr Hammond some wriggle room?
The right way to look at the UK economy is that it's crying out for greater government investment, it's crying out for more government spending of that type. So I think that's what the Chancellor should do. I think what the Chancellor probably will do is worry a bit too much about government debt and not enough about what the country needs in terms of investment.
Here in America and away from prying eyes, the Chancellor met other finance ministers to press his case for the best deal between Britain and the EU. He has talked about a roller coaster ride. For the pound today, it felt more like the Big Dipper. Kamal Ahmed, BBC News, Washington.
The Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump could be facing more criticism over his attitude to women after a video emerged tonight in which he's apparently heard making lewd and disparaging remarks. The conversation was recorded during the show Access Hollywood in 2005 and has been obtained by the Washington Post newspaper and published this evening. Let's get the latest from our North America editor John Sopel, who's in Washington. John, what's Mr. Trump apparently heard saying?
Well, Clive, Donald Trump's approach to women and his attitudes towards women has been fairly well documented. He's come under attack by Hillary Clinton for it, for comments that he made about Alicia Machado, the former Miss Universe. But what we hear on this tape is something on a different scale altogether. It's lewd, it talks about groping women, it talks about women in pretty disparaging terms as sort of sexual objects. We can play a clip of it now. Just to give a bit of context, he's on a bus, so we don't actually see him. His will be the first voice you hear.
I moved on her, and I failed. I'll admit it.
Whoa.
I did try and she was married.
It's huge news there.
I'm automatically attracted to beautiful. I just start kissing them. It's like a magnet. You just kiss. I don't even wait. And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Whatever you want.
Hello, how are you? Hi.
Mr. Trump, how
nice
are
seeing
you?
you. Terrific.
Pleasure to meet you.
Terrific. You know Billy Bush?
How are you?
Nice to see you. How you doing, Ariane?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Are you ready to be a soap star?
And there was much more besides of a very pretty graphic nature in that. Now, Donald Trump has issued a statement saying this was locker room banter, a private conversation that took place many years ago. And then he added, Bill Clinton has said far worse. Hillary Clinton has just tweeted in the past few minutes, this is horrific. We cannot allow this man to become president. I think why this is significant is that Donald Trump's problems with reaching women and getting the women's vote has already been documented. I also think this plays into temperament about the manner of Donald Trump, which is something else that Hillary Clinton has tried to accuse him of. I suppose if there is a silver lining in all of this, America is totally preoccupied by Hurricane Matthew and maybe slightly less concerned about the latest storm Donald.
OK. John, thank you for that. John Sopel in Washington. Thanks. The UKIP MEP accused of hitting his colleague, Stephen Woolfe, who ended up in hospital, has been giving his account of their altercation. Mike Hookham denies throwing a punch and said the incident was more handbags at dawn than a major fistfight. Mr. Woolfe is still receiving treatment after collapsing and suffering 2 seizures. UKIP says it will hold a full investigation. From Strasbourg, here's our political correspondent, Alex Forsyth.
A smile from his hospital bed, despite a bust-up that left his party bruised. Stephen Woolfe will be here for another 2 days after an altercation with a fellow MEP. There was a row between him and this man, Mike Hookham, during a UKIP meeting. Mr. Hookham says it was just a scuffle.
There was no punches thrown, there was no face slapping, there was no digs, there was nothing. It was, as you know, people in Hull would term as, you know, handbags at dawn.
So what caused it? anger, Mr Hookham told the BBC, because Stephen Wolfe, who wants to be UKIP's next leader, had considered defecting to the Tories.
Was it instigated by him? Was it instigated by the Tories? You know, just what was happening, and could we trust him as a leader? Is he going to jump ship in the future?
What happened here yesterday might be embarrassing, but it's just a symptom of a much wider problem for UKIP. The party's had huge success. It has more MEPs than any other. But internally, there are fundamental differences about the direction it should take, how it should be run, and crucially, who should lead it.
Some are loyal to the party Nigel Farage has created, plain speaking, anti-establishment, strong on immigration. Others think he has too much control and want a broader agenda, including some former Tories who've joined UKIP. A previous advisor to Nigel Farage, who now wants to be leader, said the rifts are deep.
There has been a lack of impetus at the very top of the party to solve the divisions in the party. There are two very clear camps inside the party who want to take the party in two very different directions. Those things aren't irreconcilable. If everyone's willing to sit down around the table and put all the past behind them, we can absolutely move on from this and make the party great again.
What led to this hospital visit will be investigated by the party and the European Parliament. While Stephen Wolfe is said to be recovering, the damage to UKIP could take longer to repair. Alex Forsyth, BBC News, Strasbourg.
Some changes are being made to the way thousands of staff are paid and rotated at a huge distribution warehouse in Barnsley run on behalf of the fashion retailer ASOS. It follows a BBC investigation into XPO Logistics, which runs the warehouse, with many staff saying they were unhappy with the system of payment for extra hours worked. The company says it's fully compliant with employment law. Our special correspondent Ed Thomas has more details.
ASOS, a global fashion retailer with its giant Barnsley warehouse. For the first time, the BBC hears from workers who say they're exploited, and a call for bosses to be questioned in Parliament. ASOS has 9 million customers and £1 billion turnover. To meet demand, it needs this warehouse. Staff pick items every 23 seconds, but some are speaking out.
I want them to get rid of Flex. I just want to be paid for the hours that I'm owed.
This worker, like many we spoke to, wanted to talk about a clause in their contract called Flex.
It's not fair.
It's meant to work like this. Staff get paid the same every month, regardless of hours worked, but can be flexed up and work an extra 10 hours every other week. The hours are not paid, but placed in a flex bank. As soon as possible, the company says it offers shorter shifts, or staff can ask to work less, so the hours balance out. But these texts from the warehouse show that 2 days before the end of the financial year, this worker was still owed over 30 hours.
I describe it as unpaid overtime.
Is it fair?
We've worked them hours, so we should get paid for them, really.
Are you exploited?
Yeah, definitely. If we don't do these hours, we get disciplined. We can be easily replaced.
XPO, the company that runs the ASOS warehouse, told the BBC persistent non-attendance for flex hours may result in disciplinary action, but no one had been sacked as a result of a failure to attend a flex shift.
That was my survival line.
Emma has left ASOS. She says she was asked to flex up just hours before a shift. A single parent, childcare meant she had to say no.
They'd basically just say that I'd go down as a late anyway.
For childcare?
For childcare issues, yeah.
ASOS say you know when your flex weeks are,
Yeah.
so sort it out. Is that
Yeah,
fair?
but it would be fair if they gave enough notice, but I don't believe like an hour, maybe 2 hours is enough notice.
XPO says staff struggling with childcare are encouraged to speak out, and being asked to flex up on the day is very rare, and that staff are given their flex weeks months in advance. But this lawyer believes flex contracts may breach employment law.
What's not permissible is for additional hours, flexed up hours, to be banked and for those hours to be suspended and then paid at the end of the financial year. They should be reconciled during the national minimum wage reference period, which can't go beyond a month.
XPO says it complies fully with employment law.
It's all for the advantage of the company at the expense of the workers.
Ian Wright is the chair of the Commons Business Committee, the MP who led the inquiry into Sports Direct. He wants flex contracts tested in law.
How is it reasonable that you've done a period of work in 1 month and that you might not be paid for a significant number of months after that. That can't be right.
Do you want to see ASOS bosses in front of you?
Yes, absolutely. I want them to answer that question. But I also want government to answer that question. How is that allowed in law? And whether Parliament has to now change the law to address that. I think that's an important point as well. I find that really, really unfair and unreasonable. Completely.
Since our investigation began, workers inside ASOS have been promised change. Firstly, they've been told they'll no longer be asked to flex up on the day. Secondly, they've been promised all outstanding hours currently in the Flex Bank will be paid this month. And from now on, a pledge that unpaid flex hours will be settled at time and a half at the end of the financial year.
They needed to.
Too late though for former workers like Emma.
And that job means so much to those people. It meant so much to me. You know, you're trying to survive.
ASOS says it cares deeply for its workers, but pressure is building. The GMB union is demanding an inquiry, and soon bosses could be brought before MPs. Thomas, BBC News, Barnsley.
The former head of the troubled Southern Health NHS Trust, Katrina Percy, has left the organisation. She'd faced criticism for the Trust's failure to investigate hundreds of unexplained deaths. She leaves with a payoff of nearly £200,000. This year's Nobel Peace Prize has been won by the Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos. He's being honoured for brokering a peace deal with armed Marxist rebels in his country that brought to an end 50 years of conflict in which up to 200,000 people died. But the prize is being awarded despite the peace deal being rejected by the people of Colombia in a referendum last weekend. Here's our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette.
It had been one of the world's longest, most brutal wars. A 50-year war, a byword for kidnappings, disappearances, murder. Then last week, an extraordinary moment. The FARC leader, Rodrigo Londono, apologized.
En nombre de las FARC.
To all the victims, for all the pain. With a pen fashioned from a bullet, President Santos signed their peace deal. It wasn't enough. Days later, Colombians rejected the accord narrowly in a nationwide vote. A shocking setback after years of negotiations and secret talks. But today, a vote of confidence for the president, the world's most prestigious prize for a peacemaker.
This prize gives me more energy and impetus to go forward. We lost a small battle with the vote, but we're in the fight for peace, and we're going to win it with all of you.
Years ago, as defense minister, Juan Manuel Santos fought hard against the FARC and negotiated the release of hostages. But he also opened a secret channel for talks. When I met him in Colombia last week, he admitted winning a real peace would be as hard as waging war.
The signature of the deal is simply the end of the conflict. Then the hard work starts, reconstructing our country, a country at war for 50 years.
Even the Peace Prize is divisive. It's excellent, says Paolo, an engineer. It will help the peace process. For Manuel, it's a farce. The fight is now on the streets. Critics demand tougher punishment for the FARC. Supporters say the president got the best deal he could. Only Colombians can bridge this divide. But their president is now a Nobel laureate. Yes to peace, he cries. His prize sends a powerful message. Winning this peace matters to Colombians and the world. Lise Doucette, BBC News.
He was regarded as the best racehorse in the world, winning all his races before retiring in 2012. So what has Frankel been doing since? And why is he now worth a staggering £150 million? Our sports correspondent Richard Conway has been finding out.
A horse who is pure class, Frankel, has destroyed them from halfway.
He was quite simply flat racing's greatest ever thoroughbred. After 14 consecutive wins, including this memorable victory in the prestigious 2000 Guineas, Frankel retired in glory.
Come on, big fella.
Owned by Prince Khalid Abdullah of Saudi Arabia, he's now worth an estimated £150 million, with horses he's fathered winning 23 races so far. Given such success, yearlings with Frankel in their bloodline are now selling at premium prices of over £1.1 million.
Frankel definitely has added an extra dimension. He was probably the best racehorse that any of us have ever seen. He's got off to a fantastic start as a stallion, and that has heightened the interest this year with his second crop of yearlings.
So this is where the magic happens. But producing the next generation of champions comes with a hefty price tag. In fact, it'll cost you £125,000 for what would be an intimate moment with Frankel.
The economics are pretty staggering in terms of what he can, what sort of stud fee he can command, and what his progeny, the sales can command, and mares in foal and that sort of thing. But racing it's a futures business. We're buying tomorrow, and that's exciting.
But Frankel's value to his owner and to the sport as a whole could yet be given a further boost. One of his sons, Seven Heavens, will this weekend attempt to echo his father's success by winning the Dubai Dewhurst Stakes, a race which crowns Europe's best 2-year-old horse.
He resonates in people's hearts, and for now, you know, his 2-year-old, his babies going out and winning races, winning good races, is again massive for our sport, because it continues that story.
It seems Frankel's illustrious career in racing still has a long way to run. Richard Conway, BBC News, Newmarket.
That's it. Now on BBC One, it's time for all the news where you are. Have a very good night.